Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I know this is the last session of the day, so we're going to try and make it enjoyable, more conversational. A lot of people think culture, recruiting, maybe not a lot of people in this room, but I think a lot of people I talk to think culture is easy, right? It comes naturally. It comes with the people you hire. Culture will be created. I find culture to be one of the hardest things at any company, especially a startup, if you want to create an intentional culture. So we'll spend a lot of time today talking about the difference between unintentional and intentional culture and how it's important whether you sit on the leadership team, whether you sit on any team. Startups are an opportunity for you to have an impact on the culture. That's why we've all joined a startup, to have an outsized impact in our field or on the team. So how many people in here sit on kind of people ops or recruiting? Okay, great. That's actually great because my whole point is culture does not have an owner. Culture is distributed. And much like a distributed company, everyone needs to be proactive in their communication in order to have the highest impact. So we'll talk about a variety of different things today. I go to a lot of various talks like this. I actually like a lot of very actionable outcomes. So you'll see my presentation. We'll talk about, why to do things, but then I'll give you like real hardcore strategies and processes that you can take into your company, because I find that can be, at a startup, we all have a lot of time we have no time to do a lot of the harder processes, so hopefully there'll be some actionable outcomes. Great, so where to start? Obviously you're joining a startup, you're at a startup, people are saying you're gonna scale 50%, 100%, you have to scale 50 people in machine learning in 2 months. Like how do you even do that, right? Talk about machine learning, the hardest role, but if you're going even more wide than that, how do you even start? So with any problem, narrow the scope and also accept that things will break. So I'm a big believer of just being vulnerable and authentic as a leadership style. I think it makes you more human. I also think it empowers others from different backgrounds who might not have role models. You might be their only one role model. So if you pretend to be perfect, they will assume they have to be perfect. So if you can embody, which is really hard, just accept failure. It will happen, things will break. Being humble in what you don't know, so being able to ask for help and being able to actually admit, especially in the people function, I find this really challenging in my peers. It's really hard to say like, oh, that didn't work. That feedback review process, that didn't work, we need to fix it. That communication strategy, it actually doesn't work. So if you can just embrace humility, and then perspective, it's just another day. It's just another incident. There will be so many other ones coming, probably more challenging. So it's gonna be okay. There's always another day. This is one of any Hamilton fans in the room? Okay, good. So huge Hamilton. I listen to this song. Running is like my anxiety medication. And this is like the one line that I just crush it on in the last mile. And this is a good one to just remember. It's my motto. So a few key areas. When you talk about scaling, you can't focus on everything. And I was writing this and reading through it. It's a lot of key areas, so you don't have to choose every single one, but these are key areas that when you're thinking about scaling, if you can focus one at a time, 2 or 3 at a time, you'll have a lot more ability to focus, go deep, and not feel overwhelmed. So we'll run through all of these today. What I think works really well is in those key areas, when you're scaling, things will break. So how can you build pattern recognition to watch out for what is about to start breaking? So these are some of the 5 areas that I really find you need to pay attention to at all times. And then if they start breaking, you can actually be proactive in fixing your processes to scale even further. So around every 25 to 50 people, under 250, things will start to break. After 250, it starts to become larger. The number can go up to like 100, and then you go up to 500, starts to break again. These are the key areas. So decision making, is it very clear who makes decisions, how decisions are made? Information sharing, do people know how to communicate out? Even today, I heard about something going on that I was like, whoa, okay, no one told me that affects my team directly. Clearly something's breaking. We need something to start over again. Cultural shifts, so this can be really harder to keep a pulse on, and this is where your influence as a leader comes in and your relationships as in your network really matter. You need to be able to, so when we say we, I'm talking as a people leader, so let me take back. No one needs to do anything. you have more impact and you'll have more influence if you can actually speak up when you start to notice things. So if you can speak up and say, hey, that person doesn't feel included anymore, this group of individuals is feeling left out, we're not doing a great job keeping people engaged, our attrition rates are going up. If you are brave enough to bring that to people's attention, they will respect you even more. High performers, so people want to grow. They joined your startup to grow faster than they could at a larger company. How are you going to reward them? How are you going to incentivize them? And how are you going to promote them? Pay attention to them. People managers. So you can't scale as a people leader, as a functional leader, but your managers are scalable. So if you focus, if anything else, if you just focus on people managers and then pour into them all these other areas, you'll really be able to scale a network much more effectively and scale a company more effectively. Any questions on this at all?
Just that last point?
Yeah.
Can you repeat?
Yes, pouring into people managers.
Yes.
So big believer in, and I'll dive into this, but people managers are your scaling function. They are your leverage. They can provide the scalability that you alone cannot provide. So being able to spend a lot of time defining people management expectations, I know a lot of startups don't do that. What does it mean to be a manager? Do we expect every single manager to have a one-on-one, or do we don't? And don't count on it being implicit. Make it always explicit, because you don't want to have that conversation with a manager and like, well, I don't know, we haven't met in 3 months. You'll be like, what are you talking about? Like, well, how have you had a one-on-one in 3 months? I didn't know. Got it. Okay, so that's not an inclusive process if I'm not being explicit, because I'm using my bias to assume that everyone understands things the way I do. So being explicit removes a lot of biases that we have around information sharing. Any other questions? Okay. So design for everyone. When we're thinking about, again, be making the implicit explicit. When you're starting new programs, when you're thinking about new ideas, solicit diverse perspectives. Go out. If you are a white woman, I need to go out and solicit perspectives that are not white and not female, because I'm only able to think the way I think. We all know, or maybe we don't know, but this is a lot of talks I go to. The first iPhone or Android was only designed by people who were right-handed, so that anyone who was left-handed couldn't take a picture on it. It didn't work, right? So think about that whenever you're designing something. How would someone who's left-handed approach this? How would it work for them? Underrepresented experiences. I'm first-generation college student. We design Handshake as a platform focused on helping students from all backgrounds achieve the same goals and have the same opportunities. So if someone is new to your culture and maybe you're a quiet culture and they're being really boisterous, maybe no one in their family's been to an office before. It's not their fault. You just have to educate them, or you have to provide that information to them. So when you're thinking about underrepresented experiences, once again, go outside your comfort zone, talk to people, and ask how it works for them. Individuals with families, I see startups getting this wrong most of the time. Drinking culture, lots of late night, 8 p.m. dinners that go till midnight. People have families. If they have families, they're not going to feel included. So think about that. Don't have dinners late at night if you don't want people to stay at the office and they want to go home. Think how you can make it inclusive. I think you can do both. You can have some dinners, but also have some lunches, have some breakfasts. Make sure to hold family events. Make sure to just ask people as well. Do you feel included? How does it work to balance your work and your family? So moving on. Beyonce? Okay. So before you get started, no Beyonce? Okay. Prep checklist. Make sure you have your team and tools, Greenhouse, your ATS, Intello, any recruiting sources you want to have. Make sure you set that up. Let's talk to a few agencies. I like to set them up against each other. It's a little competitive. Just see who can send the best candidates within the first 2 weeks, and then it takes up a lot of time to work with agencies. So pare down. I say 5 to 10 per recruiter is kind of max number of outside agencies you can work with. Headcount and budget. This sucks if you don't set it up early. Make sure there's a headcount process. It doesn't mean that you'll have an annual process that doesn't move, but set it up to be either a monthly check-in or a quarterly check-in, because you don't want someone coming in and be like, oh, we're hiring a new iOS person. Okay, there's no budget for that. And so it creates a lot of process frustration. You need to have some process and you need to communicate that out. Also a budget, just have a range for each role so you don't get bogged down in the inefficiency of going back and forth or the CEO not knowing what that budget is, especially around equity ranges. Just have an approved budget for each role. It's my favorite. You gotta believe in it. It's hard work, so you gotta really wanna work with the people and hire the people that you wanna work with. This is big for me. I am the only woman on our leadership team. I've always been often the only woman in the room. I think it's really important to have people that you can turn to when you feel insecure, vulnerable, and you need help. So this has been really powerful for me, and it's also really powerful as someone who's scaled a startup successfully. That's always really, really wonderful to be around. And then sanity breaks. Huge believer. You gotta go home. You gotta turn off your phone. You gotta do it. You will show up better if you are rested and emotionally sane. I think that little things matter a lot. I've turned off Slack notifications on my phone after 7 p.m. Oh my God, it's changed my life. It's amazing. Now people have figured out how to text me, but it was really good for the first 2 weeks. So I highly recommend that. So focus today, we'll go through a little bit of these. As I mentioned, they'll be pretty kind of strategic, or strategic's probably the wrong word, very actionable. The point here is really what can you take back tomorrow, not let me teach you a long class on the theory behind this. It's more so what can you do tomorrow to start taking action. So culture and values. So values shape your culture, culture shapes everything. I read this last night and I was like, oh, this is kind of wrong. So I'll tell you a little bit about why I think it's right and why I think it's wrong. So values do shape your culture. Your values can be intentionally designed to shape your culture. But before you have values, you already have culture. So when we're thinking about being inclusive, it actually means taking a step back from the culture that already exists and understanding what values you want to drive that culture. So there will be, for the first probably 25 employees, there'll be a pretty strong culture. It'll be unintentional. It'll be harder to fix later. It'll be harder to fix that really kind of competitive nature that comes out if you don't build in values to mitigate that. So I think it's really important to get your values right. First up, I think, is an identification process. If you can do a bottoms-up and inclusive values process where you ask people from the bottom, hey, what do you think the values are today? What would you like the values to be for the future? Communicating the values throughout the entire employee life cycle. So from recruiting, do they get a PDF of your values after the first phone screen? Why not? It's an easy win right there. Just assign a PDF, upload it into your ATS. Every single candidate gets a values handout. It's never a surprise. And then culture is what you recognize, it's what you reinforce, and it's what you reward. People look to those 3 pillars, and that defines your culture. Those are the things that really matter. And so making sure that when you're giving praise publicly, it's actually people who are having a high impact, but also living and aligning to the values that you think are really strong. So talking a little bit about how to identify. Does everyone here have company values? No one has a single company value? Okay, a few people, it's okay. So I think a bottoms up, tops down, this comes from being inclusive. If your CEO tells everyone what the values are, those are his values. It's not a company value. You get a CEO-driven culture, which can be great, but it can also be very exclusive. So if you want to intentionally design an inclusive culture, be inclusive throughout the process. Ask people what they believe to be true. Ask people what they wish were true. And then tops down too, right? It needs to be aligned to the business impact you want to make. There is a business outcome everyone is looking to achieve, so making sure that you're aligning the bottoms up with the tops down to produce the end result. Encourage participation from all backgrounds. Some people have a really hard time speaking up, so make sure it's not just raise your hand. Make sure there's an opportunity to write in, make sure there are one-on-ones, make sure there are opportunities for people who may not feel comfortable in a larger environment speaking up. So then shape the bottom-up's feedback into thoughtful, intentional values. Easier said than done, but you'll start to pick up, you can do like really cool word clouds. You'll start to pick up, there's some tool, if you search, you just input all the words that you've gotten, it'll spit out numerically the word count from each of the documentation. Then you can start to see what comes out of that, and you can shape some good values through that. So as I talked about reinforcing, recognizing, and rewarding, bring values into comp and promotion. Make sure anytime you do a compensation raise, there's a quick check, there's an audit. Hey, is this person aligning to our values? Is there anywhere where we feel uncomfortable promoting this person or giving them more compensation if they're not treating people nicely, if they're not living to this value or that value? If you don't reward and recognize someone based on their behavior, that's a huge statement. And I think it's a good statement, but I would encourage everyone else to stand more strongly towards that. Incorporating to office design, I'm sure many of you have the values on the wall, or maybe you don't, but I know it's cliche and a lot of people think it's tacky. I still like it. You still have to look around your walls, and I'd rather see the values that I believe in than some random piece of art. You can do both. Communicate them internally and externally. Hashtags on Twitter, just build it into anything that you do. Make it more public. It actually creates a lot of camaraderie internally. If you have public-facing words that reflect internal culture, that becomes kind of a rallying cry. And then weave the values language into everything you do. Put it into your feedback reviews. Put it into any documentation that you write. Make sure that the language itself is reflected throughout. So this is kind of, oh, Leah's here. Sorry, Leah's in the audience today. Didn't know you'd be here. But so these are kind of some things that we talk about when we talk about communicating values, sharing out who gets promoted, and you kind of cut out the rest of the email, but we talk about why. We talk about like what she did, the values she demonstrated. Talk about reinforcing and rewarding. Jordan wrote a blog post. We can all retweet it, share it. There's a lot of power and amplification. And then we have awards, weekly awards that are tied to our values. So someone has to nominate someone else based on the values that they exhibited that week. Measure and improve. Nothing's perfect. It breaks often. So design surveys to gather the data that you want in order to iterate. Making sure to ask underrepresented backgrounds to share their experiences to qualify. If you want to know if your culture is inclusive, ask the underrepresented folks in the room. You don't need to ask the people who are the dominant majority. I can promise you they feel fine. I think it's the people on the edges. You need to design for the edge cases. So talk to the people on the edges and make sure you're qualifying all the data that you get with stories. Measure regularly. We actually do monthly pulse surveys through Culture Amp. Huge fan. It's pretty cheap if you're under a certain number of employees, so I'd recommend that. And iterate, change things up, share the data, and change. This is one of our Culture Amp surveys that we do, so we have a few different questions that we ask monthly. So we can watch month-over-month trends, kind of correct things as they happen, talk to that, share the data, create a culture of transparency around the things that are occurring. Does anyone here use Culture Amp at all? Okay, good. I would recommend it to everyone. It's really helpful. They actually had a huge conference yesterday and today too in San Francisco. They're really recommend them. On to recruiting. You can't scale with a small recruiting team, but recruiting often has no budget. So what do? You turn everyone into a recruiter. Things that you can do, referral program. I think a lot of startups are hesitant to this, and I understand in theory. I've had a few CEOs push back on me. Hey, if they're excited to work here, everyone should be excited to work here. We don't need to pay people. It's fine, but it could be a lot slower. And we want to scale quickly, and also you're paying outside agencies. You might as well pay a fraction of the cost to an inside employee who refers someone with stronger signal. So establish that program early. It can start really small. I've been at some companies where we actually don't use cash, we use experiences. It could be a dinner out, it could be a staycation, it could be whatever they want. So if you don't want to do the cash, there are other ways to reward people. Interview training, this is hard because it does take a lot of time, but it's a good thing to do to train all new hires and regularly retrain interviewers. And then structured interviewing. Make sure all the panels you have a person of color or a person of the non-dominant gender, someone who has a different background. And if someone interviewing is of an underrepresented background, it's really powerful to have someone that looks like them on that panel. And I know that might be uncomfortable for some, but actually it's inclusive. They can see that they belong, they can see that there's someone else like them there. Happens with a lot of female engineering panels. There's not a single woman when they interview. If I were on that panel, I don't want to join a company where I might be the only woman. So showcase that diversity that you might have internally. Scorecards, make sure that you have structured scorecards. You don't want people that give biased feedback. You want it to be all the same questions every single time. If you can use the same interviewers, that's best, because then they'll start to see what good looks like and they'll have a better data-driven analysis of how to compare and contrast candidates. I'm a huge fan of creating a values-aligned interview. So, culture fit is out. People want to start saying culture add or values aligned. So putting into scorecards each value at the company and then having a key question around each one of those values, how that candidate measures up to it. Some companies will do a different approach. They'll have a values question in each interview stage. You can do whatever you'd like. I think it can be really powerful to create a values interview and then train people who are really passionate about the culture. Again, inclusive. If you train a cohort of your employees who really care about developing the right culture to be your values interviewers, that's a huge, powerful tool at your advantage. People can then opt in because they care about the culture. Someone's complaining about the culture, you can recommend that they join this values interview group, and then they have more say about who's joining the company, and they're able to really strongly recommend candidates. So I think I'm over my time, but I was going to have everyone jot down 3 questions for your values interview template, but instead I'll just pause. Any questions so far? Reactions, thoughts? Yes.
Yeah. Just
cool.
You mentioned getting feedback from people who are on the edges.
Yeah.
How do you do that without being like, oh hey, you're a minority, I'm coming to you just for that, or is it okay to do that? Is there any way to embrace that awkwardness?
I totally embrace the awkwardness because it's not going to be comfortable, and the change happens when you're uncomfortable. Good things happen from discomfort. I wouldn't say exactly that, but I think if I were a minority or someone who's underrepresented, I actually really appreciate it when someone asks me, hey, at this leadership offsite, you're the only woman. How does it feel going to a pool? Not that great. Thanks for asking. I actually really appreciate when someone notices that I'm different, as opposed to saying, oh, hey, the worst thing is I'm colorblind. Okay, but I'm a colored person, right? I have a color. Am I blind to you? I'm gender blind, but I am a woman. So what does that mean? So I think not shying away from being direct, being thoughtful about how direct you are, and also saying, prefacing, I might not know all the right words to say. My intention is to make you feel more comfortable, and I'd love your feedback in doing so. So I think if you preface it with your intention, allow room to make mistakes, and hopefully the other person recognizes your intention. Yeah.
Just wanted to let you know you have until 4:15.
Oh, not till 4. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Define hiring manager role. I think this can really break as you scale, can break even before you start scaling. Who has the final decision power on the hire? Is it the hiring manager? It might not be, and that's okay, but define that clearly. You'll make a lot of mistakes, and there'll be a lot of bad feelings if the hiring manager thinks they're making the decision, but it's actually the department lead, someone on leadership, or their CEO. So being really explicit that, hey, we'd like you to take on some of the roles and responsibilities, but the final decision may rest outside of this. And I think just saying that, again, it's not always comfortable, but it's a lot easier when people know explicitly what's going on. Accountability through metrics. So when you're trying to hire more representation onto your team, a lot of executive search firms do this, but I think you can do it internally as well. Sharing the metrics week over week, how many women you interviewed, how many people of color you've interviewed, breaking it down by people of color and women that you've rejected and men that you have accepted to move on further, actually puts that into data week over week, and then you can start showing trends. So that can be really powerful and a really good way of just showing them the data. When a lot of people think people in recruiting is all emotional, I like to come back with some data that can be helpful. Communication, weekly syncs, really powerful. I recommend 15 minutes every week with the hiring manager. On high priority roles, we do a 5-minute stand-up daily. We run through all the candidates. We talk about anyone that we think is dropping out of the process, that we might need to leverage external forces for, anyone that we want to close and offer to. It allows us to move really quickly. And then measure sourcing and reach outs. So I like to set recruiters to a reach out standard and then also an on-site standard. So a metric to aim for every week helps people just get accountability around when you say, oh, make sure to fill this role in 2 months. Okay, no, make sure to have 3 on-sites a week. Then that actually yields better results than just going at the outreach. So moving on to recognition and rewards, I think this can be really powerful when you talk about designing an inclusive culture. Rewarding great behavior. So not only paying attention to the high performers, but who are the people that are moving your culture forward. So when you stop and think about people in your culture, are there people that come to mind when you think about kind of culture drivers? Okay, I know it's the last session of the day, tired, but there has to be, right? There's someone that you think about that maybe can move the culture forward. Are they also the highest performer? They might be, they might not be. Are they critical to the company's success? They might be. If you lose culture, it's a lot harder to rebuild. So setting up ways for people who are cultural drivers to understand and recognize their importance. Public praise, so I think peer recognition can be really powerful. Bonusly is a really cool tool if you haven't used it. It's a peer recognition platform. It incorporates with Slack. It also incorporates with HRIS systems, and it's a way to give and receive peer feedback. You can translate it into dollars. You don't have to, but it's a really cool way. Some companies will allocate, you have $20 a month for peer bonus systems. You can allocate that accordingly. So it actually distributes the ability to give praise in a really tangible way. Leadership opportunities. So this is here when inclusion starts to really matter, is pay attention to who you're promoting. Measure it, look at the data quarterly. How many white men have you promoted? How many women? How many people of color have you promoted? Look at that data quarterly and then yearly, once you start having more years under your belt. Then it allows you to track it and measure it and iterate before it starts to become a problem. Our company, Handshake, was with Michelle Obama's Reach Higher today, and actually she said something interesting where when the opportunity arises to give someone without privilege an opportunity to succeed, you should think really long and hard about why you're not giving it to that person. Their journey has been harder. They have had they have a harder journey to get to where they are today. Not everyone, I think it's hard to talk in generalizations, but I think that's an opportunity for everyone to pause and reflect and just think about what have they had to overcome to get here today, and then think really hard about the promotions and the compensation changes you're making. Team awards, so this is like an actual, if you want to start setting up team awards, I think this is a really great way to do it. You can align them to your values weekly. Send out it's very simple. Send out a Google form, ask for nominations, tie them to your values, share it across the team. We actually started also doing a leadership impact award. So this is quarterly, and we associate it with kind of a monetary open table gift certificate and then a donation to a charity that they support. So that's a way that we, on a quarterly basis, recognize and elevate someone at a leadership level that we want to support as well. So there's 2 tiers of recognition. This is also really crucial when thinking about inclusion. We actually look at who's nominated regularly to make sure that people are nominating not just the loudest speakers of the room or the people that look like them. We actually go back and look at the data, look at the breakdown between women and men, people of color and non-people of color, to make sure there is inclusion and not too much bias when it goes to who's receiving these awards as well. Any questions on this?
When you say you're looking at data, how large does the company have to be to actually make statistical?
That's a good point. So I think statistical significance depends on the data set itself, right? So statistical significance within a 100-person company, we start to see it pretty regularly over time. To your point, I think if you're like 50 or less, I don't know, 50, I think you could start seeing some trends, but probably 25 or less, it becomes really hard to see a lot of significance. Yeah.
You talked about the journey.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I understood what you were saying there. It's like, right, we have a for-profit company, and so
Yeah.
I want performance, right?
Yeah.
So someone else's journey may have been harder, but another candidate may be going to produce better in the role, despite whatever you want to fill for your quotas,
Right.
or how do you think about it?
I would just challenge you to think, is that based on your assumptions of performance, or is that based on non-biased, unbiased ways of measuring performance? How do you know? What are you measuring them on? I'm not saying it's not possible at all. I'm just saying because you went to Stanford doesn't mean you'll perform better.
Oh, sure.
Right, exactly. Like the journey, they might be, in my case, I am a first-generation college student. Like I did it all on my own. Right, so like when it comes to me being at work, I still do a lot of it. I can stand up projects. I will push through boundaries. I will work harder than anyone else because I've always had to. So I think it's more just about understanding, we talk about this a lot at Handshake when we talk about employers hiring college students, or a college student recruiting platform is employers, they actually like to see if a student's worked 3 jobs while staying in school full time, right? Like what's the journey that person has had to have? Did they have an SAT preps tutor? Is that why their SATs are perfect? Or did they actually study and work late at night to do that? So I think it actually measures for initiative and resilience really early on when you think about the candidate journey, what they had to do in their life to get to where they are today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought you were talking more in promotion, because like new hires makes a lot of sense, but promotion when somebody's been there for 2 years.
Yeah, so no.
You know what they're capable of.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
Totally agree with you.
I love that you're doing all this analysis.
Yeah.
How big is your company and how big is your HR team?
Yeah.
Doing all this analysis?
We're 100. My team's very small. I think it's critically important to build an inclusive culture to have unbiased data. So I do the work, and I think it's important. I would love to hire a data analyst one day on my own team. But right now, I think it's really important I do it myself. Communication. So I think this is probably one of the hardest things at a company level. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, question around the data analytics.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about sharing
Yes.
that data internally and then being exposed to, say, lawsuits, which I know lots of folks are worried
Yes.
about?
Yeah, this is actually a conversation we have a lot, and I was in New York on a panel, and we talked about this at length about we talk about recruiting data. That's kind of where a lot of the lawsuits can come out. I don't have a good answer yet. I don't know about how much data to share because I think it really depends on what you're measuring. So I think there is not a good one answer for everything that you're measuring. When we talk about, so we actually run an inclusion survey every year. That gives us data that we do share out. It's all self-identified. So you would never share unself-identified data. You can only share identified data. So I would never share if you are kind of assessing your own candidate pipeline for gender or background, can't share that data at all. But your EEO data, you could share on a quarterly basis because it's not attributed to role. That's perfectly fine. And you report it to the EEO anyways. Other data, I think it really depends on what the goal is. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Not a good answer, but I don't know yet. I'm still figuring out what's a good amount of data to share because I want the outcome and the impact to be positive and helpful or constructive and iterative. But if it's going to be neutral, I don't see a lot of value in sharing the data. Communication, so there's always someone new when you're scaling. You could have said, we've learned this the hard way a lot of times when we'll say like, oh my God, we just talked about like this big new project that we're launching 2 weeks ago. Yeah, but there are 10 new people. They've never heard about it before. So what we always say on our leadership team is like, until you're sick of saying it, someone has not heard it yet. So you have to be really sick of saying it until someone hasn't heard it. So all hands, I think it's a really great way to bring the company together at least once a week. I'm sure many of you do this. I think this is not secret to many people. I think it is really important to have leadership front and center, at least attending and sitting up front and center. ICs can present. I think it's really powerful to show that it matters at a company level, the communication. Because these are the touchy-feely stuff, communication, getting people together, people start to zone out, their eyes glaze over. But it matters. Competition's so high right now in the Valley. Like, people can join any company if they just want to develop their career. They want to enjoy working with you. So give them a reason to enjoy it. Create joy and create celebrations throughout your employee's life cycle. So this is our view, so I had to share it. We have a pretty awesome view. So this is our company, All Hands, which is great. I think it's gone through different iterations, but right now we have every team present upon what they're working on. We do new hires every week. We do anniversary celebrations. So I think it can be really helpful just to bring everyone together. Especially when you're scaling, it's a good way to introduce everybody, and the face to the name can become really important. Updates that. So this is something new that we're trying out actually as well. We started a company-wide email. It could also be a Slack channel to share information that could be too detailed for all hands. So it's a great way to get deeper data, deeper information from some individuals who might really want to know about, the recruiting that we're doing on some team, but not the whole company wants to know about it. So it's a way to share updates. It's a great leadership opportunity for someone on small teams as well. Just start sending a weekly kind of templated update email. What did you launch that week on a product? What was the response rate? What's the NPS of the users using that product? For anyone who wants to, it's a great way to get more information. So I don't know if I'm such a culture fan, but Friday Night Lights, no? Tried to make it work. I don't think it really works, but tried to make it work. I'm a huge believer in feedback. You can't perform, you can't get better, you can't do much if no one's giving you feedback. And in the product, we do it all the time. So why don't we do it internally, right? We're always measuring NPS. We're always measuring, like, what's our App Store rating? How many students do we have using this today? Does it go down? Why aren't you doing that internally? And I think leadership can really set the tone here. All Hands is a great way. CEO gets up. Hey, I learned that I was doing this badly. Here's what I'm going to do to improve. If you start setting that tone, everyone feels a lot more comfortable taking that step to admit that they're wrong or to admit that they're going to improve upon something. Open about the feedback you received. I think managers could do this a lot better. I struggle with it. It's really hard to be that vulnerable. But talk about, hey, you know, I realized that was not a good way of what I did yesterday. I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think I could improve. Here are 3 things that I'm already doing. Just shows the growth mindset that we all talk about. No one really puts it into action in their one-on-one. So I think that's an opportunity there as well. We actually just also started leadership lunches, which are kind of cool. We got a lot of great feedback. So everyone on the leadership team weekly will have a lunch with just 5 people, and it's all open Q&A. So it's an ability there to really gather real feedback from in smaller sessions. Reviews. So a lot of people balk at feedback or performance reviews and say, don't do it, it's too corporate. I understand that, but I think there's a really, really good reason to have them early, is that you don't have to do them later and then get everyone on board. I think that's one really good reason. Another good reason is people want them. If you ask most people, hey, do you want more feedback or less feedback? They're gonna say more feedback. So setting up an opportunity for people to get more feedback, especially 360 feedback. You often get feedback from your manager. You don't often get feedback from your peers. And you also don't take a lot of time to reflect on yourself, on what you're learning. Creating those learning moments when you really extract your growth leads people to feel really engaged because you're providing an opportunity for them to learn about themselves. So this is our feedback reviews. These are really simple. We have a few more questions if it's a self-review or a manager review, but I'm a big fan of the keep, start, stop method. And you just ask, you know, what should this person keep doing? What should they stop doing? What should they start doing? It's actually a really good way, just when you think about yourself too, to reflect. Like, what are you doing that's working? What are you doing that's not working? What do you want to start doing that you know you should be doing, but you're not? It makes the conversation less about yourself and more about the behavior. Because when you give feedback, you don't want it to be about the person, but you want it to be about the actions. Any questions on this? How many people do feedback reviews or some sort of performance reviews? Oh, good. I think it's changing. Good. Okay. So I think they're great.
Question. So you said no anonymous reviews. So what happens when you're asking for feedback for, let's say, the founders or the leadership team? Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of people are going to be timid to put their name and criticize someone that's in a role that's going to possibly affect their pay or their job.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we've worked around it in some ways where the CEO will send a thoughtful email to that individual. It's not just a random invite from our software. If it's someone in that position, we'll go out of our way and say, hey, you know what, we really would seek, he writes the email to the individual, say, hey, I'd love your feedback on this, this, and this, kind of telling them why and why he'd appreciate that. Also, executive coaches can be great. So oftentimes I will synthesize all the feedback for the CEO, give it to the executive coach, and he'll deliver it. So and then we can make it more about themes rather than names. Because there's oftentimes you can have thematic, it's easier to deliver feedback for an executive, it's thematic rather than individualized. Does that make sense? So if 10 people are saying the same thing, it's no longer about the person, it's about themselves. So managers, I did a whole spiel at the beginning about why I think they're so important, but I will say it again. I think they're just crucial to recruiting, to retaining and engaging your team. You are not scalable as a CEO, as a people ops person, as someone on leadership, but your managers are scalable and will be scalable. So if you start early, it's a really good chance that you'll be able to build the culture intentionally and inclusively the way you want to. So manager expectations, we actually write down in a doc what the expectations of people management at the company are, what they are in terms of meeting cadence, in terms of asking certain questions, in terms of compensation. We write everything down and we share it with them, and it's open to the entire team in our Google Drive as well. Community and resources, so this is really powerful. If you just want to start a manager's den, so a manager's lunch every month, buy your manager's lunch, ask them, hey, I know being a manager can be really draining. Let's just chat about what you're going through, and maybe people will have tips or resources that they can share. And then training. We bring in facilitators every quarter for our managers to learn more about how to be a manager, because you often promote, it's just in engineering the most, you promote the best engineer to be a manager, but he's never been a manager before. He went to school to study engineering, or he's self-taught engineering. It's really hard to self-teach to be a manager. It comes from years and years of experience. So being able to bring in just facilitators, and I'll plug Life Labs, a really affordable way. They have a great people management training. It's about $2,500 for 30 people, so it's very cost effective if you want to do that. So these are our people management expectations. We actually write them all out in a doc, and we just talk about what it means. I think it can be a really clear way of putting pen to paper and creating, again, making the implicit explicit for everyone. Shared one-on-one docs. So I'm a huge fan of this, and we talk with our managers as well. This is a great way to be inclusive when you talk about scaling your management teams. A lot of people get really nervous in one-on-ones with their manager. If you're able to give people an opportunity to write things down before they get into the room, if they're introverted, if English isn't their first language, if they have a hard conversation, if you make a shared Google Doc, it also is then accessible at a skip level so that person's manager can read it, HR can read it. There's an opportunity to have more visibility across the organization. Tend not to forget things as well, which can be really helpful. Measure and improve, so we collect, again, data, big fan. So on people managers, we collect data on all the people managers through our Culture Amp surveys, through the Pulse survey. We always ask questions around managers, and we're able to slice the data down by management as well. So we can actually go in and see which manager is underperforming over time as it relates to their peers and talk to them about it, and being able to then go back to the feedback reviews about them as well and measure the quantitative data from Culture Amp with the qualitative data from the feedback reviews and have a whole story on certain areas where they need to improve. So that's a great way for us to start a conversation.
What's the criteria you use to measure your managers?
What's the what?
What are the criteria or the points?
So the two questions we ask, and I might not get this exactly correct, is I think my manager cares about my well-being, and then my manager gives me feedback that I can use to improve, or something like feedback that helps me improve. Those are the two criteria that we care about, and those go back to the values around people management, that they're coaches and that you're empathetic. So this is kind of, we talked about inclusion throughout, but I know a lot of people want just D&I and inclusion and equity itself. So this, I think, could not be repeated more often. Start as early as possible. If you have a VP of engineering or a director of engineering role and you're a 5-person company, make it a woman. I think you will have such an easier time sending that signal later. If you have an open spot on your leadership team, do everything you can to make it someone who will add more representation to your team. People can't be what they can't see, and people look for signal really early on. I have a lot of companies contact me. The first thing I do is go to their leadership team. It's all white men. Oh, that's just like, it's exhausting. I don't want to do that again. I don't need to do that. So for me, that's a really early way. If you can set that signal early, is really important. So measure with matters. Again, I'll plug Culture Amp. They're great. They're not paying me, but the inclusion survey is really great. I would start really early. The first one we did was around 30 people. It's actually free. So they worked with this company called Paradigm in the Bay Area to put together a survey on collecting inclusion data. So you can just go to their website and use their survey for free. Gives you representation data, but then it gives you equity, a sense of equity. How are people feeling from all backgrounds at your company? Creating communities, so if you can start employee resource groups really early, that can be really powerful. Setting a signal of that people can collaborate and they can get together and self-organize based on where they feel most comfortable. It's a really powerful way of just sending the intention that, hey, we want you to create a space for yourself. We want to have conversations that matter to you. I might not be the best person to have that with, so please go and create where you can feel comfortable. And then prioritize from the top. It has to come from the CEO. I can talk about it all I want. A lot of people will not listen to me. I am not the CEO. So I think when you have the CEO using even language, even talking about, hey, we're launching feedback reviews, we've designed them to be inclusive for people from all backgrounds. The difference of that, just saying, hey, we're launching feedback reviews, we want people to be really high performers, right? Like you have a whole mentality shift of what the intention is. So this is our employee community doc. This is just, we want people to find their community and recognize that people can come from all backgrounds and every single person can be welcome. So it's an opportunity to start ERGs really early. A lot of companies don't do it until they're much larger. It's really kind of free at a startup level, and more startups should do it. They're really scalable. It's also a good recruiting and retention skill. Recruiting, you can have interview lunches. You can ask someone in the recruiting, the Chan Zuckerberg Fund does this actually. They'll ask people within the interview process, hey, we have an employee lunch. we'd want you to meet someone. Are there anyone that you'd really be interested in speaking to? Is there anyone's background or interest that you really feel strongly about? We want to make sure you feel like you belong at our company. So it's a really early way then to tap into the employee community groups to get more leverage around recruiting. That's our 1 minute handshake one. This can be really important as well. So I'm sure everyone knows now images on your careers page, just take a look at them, take them down. If they are not representative, they actually will do more harm than good. Use inclusive language in JDs. So I'm sure most people have heard of Textio. You can do a free analysis on any of your job descriptions. It'll scan every word and tell you kind of how feminine or masculine the words trend. It can be really helpful.
What's that called?
Textio, Textio. Meetings, this can be really powerful. It has to start from the top down as well. Call out interrupters. A few CEOs and leaders that I know will actually just start knocking anytime they interrupt or someone else knocks on the table. Really powerful way to cut that in the bud. I think that can be really helpful. And include pauses and call to actions. We have a culture where people tend to talk really quickly and never pause. So I try and always ask if there's any questions. And just start doing it. I recommend not calling people out. I think that sets kind of a bad standard, but just giving people the space and then they can opt in. So every 12, 15 minutes, just saying, hey, I know I've been talking really fast. I know I have been talking really fast. Does anyone have any questions? Or at the beginning, hey, I talk really quickly. Please feel free to knock or raise your hand if you have a question. Just setting the intention as a leader that it's okay to interrupt yourself, or it's okay for someone else to interrupt you. Diversity events, so I think this is really important. Create events for people from all backgrounds. Create events for families. Create events for people that can't go to a 5:30 p.m. happy hour. So create an event at like 1 o'clock on a Friday. Create different events. Create them on the weekends. Create them throughout the week, around food, around alcohol, not around alcohol. We have done everything from like bubble soccer, which is when you get into a bubble and play soccer with people, to family events throughout the office. So I think we host a lot of family-friendly events, and it's actually been really heartwarming to talk to some of the parents and saying, I've never worked at a startup where I'm allowed to bring my kid in because I'm always the only one. It's like, oh, you're not the only one, just no one talks about it. So creating even a parent group can be really powerful, or a Slack channel with parents can be powerful as well. And then again, all about data. Culture Amps Inclusion Survey, I'll plug it again. I think it's great. Start early with it so it becomes common. Analyze that data and set certain intentions that you want to improve. Dedicate and communicate the goals. Is your goals around representation? Are your goals around inclusion? A sense of equity? What are the goals that you want to achieve? Establish a timeline. So these are hard. Right now I'm working on our goals for 2020, what our representation goals want to be like for 2020, because it takes a lot of time. But if you don't communicate that you're doing it, people will not know that you're doing it. This is a good one to end on because it's lighthearted. So I think it's really fun just to have an office that you want to work in. So I think this is also important when you talk about inclusive office spaces. If it's possible, open office, quiet spaces, how can you find certain quiet spaces and design areas for people who might not like that open floor plan? We have a hard time doing it right now, but in the future, I would love to be able to do that. Google, there used to be like a library room. It was completely silent that whoever wanted to work in a really silent room could go into. So if you do have the space to create quiet spaces or phone booths or areas that are quiet, I would strongly encourage that. Showcase your values. Oh no, that's small. I still think you should put them up. I know a lot of people are talking like, oh, values on the wall, not in action. They could be both, so still put them on the wall. A good place to put them is on the back of your bathroom stalls. Just keep them top of mind. That was a Google thing we always did. We would always have all the values on the back of bathroom doors because everyone goes. And then highlight your mission. Show people why it matters to be there every day. Like, why are you there? So a lot of I thought I had a cool picture, I don't. We work with universities. We have a university flag from every school we do business with. We are really intentional right now. We're doing a project sourcing student art from universities. We want to showcase who we're working for. So that can be really impactful. Show people why they're there. seating moves. I'm a huge fan. I think people should do them often. Every 3 to 4 months, you meet new friends, new energy. It feels like a new job. But you have to be intentional about it, I think, as well. I think this is really hard to do. But if you can say, hey, we're moving seats not because this, and this, but it's fun to meet new people. It's fun to meet new friends. Please be happy about the seating move. So here is my picture, showcase your why. So we've actually renamed all our conference rooms around educational trailblazers. So people who have democratized access to education and opportunity for others. That's much like our mission is to democratize access to opportunity for all. So Mary McLeod Bethune, she helped African American and women in education. And so now every time you go into a phone room, they used to be named after like local bars in the mission. So it wasn't designed to our culture at all. So this was like a huge impact, right? Now every time I go into a room, especially with a candidate, if you're recruiting, it's a huge selling opportunity to be like, oh yeah, all our conference rooms are named after Trailblazers. Here's Mary McLeod Bethune. You know what she's doing, or what she's dead, so what she did. And it's really cool. Actually, this is a heartwarming story. I interviewed her great-grandson. I didn't know it was her great-grandson. He walked into the room. I was like, that's my great-grandmother. So it was like a really huge opportunity for me. I mean, I started crying, but it was a really cool opportunity for him to see his family's legacy move on. Okay, so it's not easy at all, and I mess up, and our culture isn't perfect either. All these things that I said are really great to do. They're really hard to implement. So I think you just forgive yourself and just start small and scale and include everyone in the process. Again, if you can focus and prioritize on a few key areas at a time, breaking it down into smaller areas, figure out what you think would have the biggest impact. Not impact to you, but to everyone else. What would have the biggest impact, and go from there. And it's worth it. And we love her. It's really fun. I really like it. That's it. Any questions at all? We have about, I think, 5 minutes. We don't have to either, because I know it's the last session and everyone's exhausted. Great. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.